Alhamdulillahi wahda. All praise and thanks are for Allah alone. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala man la nabiya ba'da. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise the rank and mention of and grant peace and blessings to the one whom there is no prophet after. Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. Our Prophet Muhammad, and to do the same for his family and his companions and his followers. Amma ba'du, and as for what follows, today inshallah ta'ala, we will continue discussing the subject matter of the athar of iman ala al-qalbi wal akhlaq. Athar al-iman wa athar al-aqidah al-sahiha ala al-a'mal al-qalbiyya wal akhlaq al-fadila. The effect of sound beliefs, having a correct belief about Allah and the ghaybiyat, the affairs of the unseen, upon the heart of a person, the effect that has or should have upon the heart of a person, and the effect that has upon his akhlaq, the effect that has upon a person's character. And this subject matter, al-a'mal, دراسة الأعمال القلبية والأخلاق الفاضلة يسمى في الإسلام بعلم السلوك. This subject matter in Islam of studying the أحوال القلبية, and the states of the heart and the actions of the heart, like love and hope and fear, and veneration and so on and so forth, and putting one's trust upon Allah, and studying moral character like courage and generosity and these sorts of things. It's called ilm as-suluk. It's called the science of the spiritual journey, the study of as-suluk, and suluk as-sirat al-mustaqim, yani, meaning following the straight path, journeying upon the straight path. And it is called by different names. And the most important of those names that is given for suluk as-sirat al-mustaqim, for walking upon the straight path, is al-ubudiyya. Al-ubudiyya, and a word that is very similar to al-ubudiyya, which means servitude and worship. A word that is very similar to that is al-istiqama. Al-istiqama. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to discuss the athar of العقيدة الصحيحة على استقامة القلب والجوارح, the effect of having correct beliefs upon the uprightness and steadfastness of the heart and the limbs. And on the uprightness and steadfastness of the heart, meaning the actions of the heart, and the love of the heart and the veneration of the heart and of the limbs. And in doing so, we're going to be reading from, and I posted to my Telegram account, and I hope the masjid I had asked the masjid to tweet it out from their Twitter, which is now called X for some silly reason. The resource for you to read along from on your mobile device, if possible. I didn't format it. So the fonts are larger as I intended to do. I didn't have the time to do that this afternoon, unfortunately. ولكن ما لا يمكن كله لا يترك جله. What we can't do entirely, we shouldn't abandon entirely. So we're going to read from two passages, inshallah ta'ala, as much as we can, and make some ijaz, make some abridgment of the speech from the great Imam, Sheikh al-Islam, al-Hafidh, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya rahimahullah ta'ala. The first that we're going to read from his book Al-Wabil al-Sayyib min al-Kalim al-Tayyib, a book that he wrote mostly about the importance of dua and dhikr. It's a lengthy book. And this is a beautiful passage about al-istiqama, the formula and the framework for al-istiqama, and what istiqama consists of. And as we said, istiqama, and is synonymous to ibadah. It's worshiping Allah the right way. Worshiping Allah with quality. Worshiping Allah with quality. That's what istiqama is. That is what istiqamah is, to worship Allah tabarak wa ta'ala in the right way, with quality, so that your heart is behind what you are doing. And the second passage we're going to read from, inshallah ta'ala, in the 10-page document that I posted, is from the book Tariq al-Hijratain. Tariq al-Hijratain, the path of the path of the two migrations, and the spiritual journey of sincerity in worship for Allah and following the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the name of a book, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and the resource is very beneficial. It's translated, fully evolved with the Arabic and the English translation for you to follow along. And it makes it easier for you, and as far as taking notes, so that if there are things that are not in the resource, you can write those things. Otherwise, you don't have to get carpal tunnel from writing, right? And so, without further ado, I'll preface this statement by Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala with what we already started with, that there is an inseparable talazum, an inseparable connection between the person's beliefs and the effect that they have on his heart. Between a person's beliefs and the effect that they have upon his heart. And a person's belief about Allah, the names, the attributes, and the actions of Allah, and the kamalat of Allah, التي هو منفرد بها, and that He is singled out with, that only He can be described. Perfect knowledge, power, wisdom, and omnibenevolence and mercy, justice, and so on and so forth. And the effect that that has upon the heart of the person, when they know that Allah knows all and sees all and hears all, watches all, has control over benefit and harm. لا تتحرك ذرة في الكون إلا بإذنه تبارك وتعالى. They know that there is not an atom that moves in this universe except by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by the leave and the predestining of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. And this has a direct effect upon the person. And there is so much that could be said about those effects. And however, to abbreviate, the simple effect upon that, the simple effect of that upon the heart is al-ibadah or al-ubudiyah. We gave yesterday a definition for al-ubudiyah in passing. We didn't really mention it in much detail. Al-ubudiyah, which is service, a servitude or worship for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it is defined by the ulama in different ways, but من أجمع ما قيل في حد وتعريف العبودية والعبادة, from the most concisive and comprehensive of definitions that you should memorize and you should know, because we were created to worship Allah. So you should know what worship is, right? What is worship? There are different definitions for worship, but for our purposes here, we're going to give a very important definition, and none of these definitions clash with the others, but it's just different ways of understanding what worship is. Worship is غاية الحب مع غاية الذل والتعظيم. غاية الحب مع غاية التعظيم. The highest level of love coupled with the highest level of ta'ظim. Ta'ظim is that a person يعرف عظمة الله. A person recognizes the magnificence and greatness of Allah. The word for that, says of writing, that a person recognizes the greatness of Allah is reverence or veneration, or simply respect. A person truly honors and respects Allah, or venerates or reveres Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not enough that a person loves Allah without their respecting and venerating Allah, or that a person venerates Allah without their loving Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. These two things are mutalaziman. They are inseparably connected. What a person knows about Allah's perfection and His beauty causes him to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And since Allah has that perfection and beauty to the highest degree, then that causes them, because Allah has this kamal, min al-kamal ala, He has this perfection to the highest degree, wa'azama, to the greatest, most magnificent degree, that is to such a level. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا أحصي ثناء عليك بل أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. Oh Allah, I don't have the ability to fully praise you as you deserve, but rather you are just as you praise yourself. So the Prophet ﷺ, who was أعلم الناس بالله وأتقاهم لله, said this, and he was the most knowledgeable and fearful of the creation, and respectful of the creation for Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. If he said this, فَكَيْفَ بِنَا, how much more is our situation in our case? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in the hadith of the Shafa'ah that is found in Sahih Muslim and elsewhere, ثُمَّ أُلْهَمُ بِمَحَامٍ لَا أُحْسِنُهُ الْآنِ. On the day of judgment, that he will be inspired by Allah with forms of glorification and praise for Allah. لا أحسنها الآن, meaning that I couldn't have the ability to praise Allah with at the moment. And so, whatever person thinks they know about or understand about any of the perfect attributes of Allah, then what Allah has of that perfection is greater than that. So there are two doorways, the scholars they say, that bring about this mahabba and this ta'zeem, this love and this veneration of Allah. One is what we just mentioned, knowing Allah bi asma'ihi wa sifatihi wa af'alihi al-bahira. So we heard yesterday, knowing Allah with His beautiful names, wa sifatihi al-ula, His lofty attributes, and His af'al al-bahirat al-hakima, and His amazing, wondrous, wise actions, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other is to know Him by His in'am, by His afdal, by His favors. To know Him by His favors. And what causes a person to love Allah and respect and revere Allah are both of these things. And the favors of Allah should humble us, to the point that in many of the ma'ajim of the Arabic language, where the word ibadah is defined, such as the writing of Ibn Faris and others, and Al-Azhari and others, and they mention with similar wordings going in a single direction, that ibadah in the Arabic language, or ubudiyah, the thing that we're talking about today, and straightforwardness, uprightness upon worship of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, it is ghayatul dhul liman lahu ghayatul al-ifdal. Ghayatul dhul liman lahu ghayatul ifdal. Is to have the highest level of humility and subservience, being obedience, for the one who has shown you the highest degree of kindness. There is no one who has shown you kindness of Allah. وَالْإِنسَانِ مَجْبُولٌ عَلَى مَحَبَّةٍ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ إِلَيْهِ. And the human being is naturally made to love those who show them kindness. No one has shown you more kindness than Allah. And anyone who has shown you kindness from the creation of Allah, فإن الله تبارك وتعالى هو الذي أسدى بهذه النعمة على يديه. And it was Allah who caused that blessing to pass through their hands to you. So when a person understands that Allah controls all matters, controls benefit and harm, and that all favors that have reached them are from Allah, and everything that has been protected, that they have been protected from of harm, and it was Allah who protected them from it. And when they know the perfect names of Allah and attributes of Allah, then the more they increase in this awareness, the more it has this double effect of al-mahabba wa ta'zeem, of al-mahabba wa ta'zeem, of having the highest degree of love for Allah and the highest degree of ta'zeem, above and beyond your love and your veneration and respect for anything else, in a way that doesn't even come close to your love or respect or veneration of anything else. Why? Because asbab as was eloquently explained by Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala in his Fatawa Sa'adiyah, because the asbab of this mahabba and ta'azim, because the causes of it are unlike the causes of any other mahabba and ta'azim, are unlike the causes of any other love and veneration. The ghayat and the thamarat that come as a result of it, of recognizing this, the effects and the fruits and the benefit that comes as a result of this, which is what comes as a result of loving Allah and venerating Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, laysa kamithlihi shay. Just as Allah laysa kamithlihi shay, there's nothing like Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and His perfection and His kindness, then there should be no nid that you make for Allah, no rival that you make for Allah in your love or in your veneration. So Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in this passage, he explains this in a most beautiful way, and we'll try to summarize some of it, where he speaks about al-istiqama, which is the same as al-ubudiyyah for the most part, and it's the same concept in play. Al-istiqama, which is steadfastness or uprightness upon the straight path, and the straight path is the straight path of worship. He says, إِنَّمَا يَسْتَقِيمُ لَهُ هَذَا بِاسْتِقَامَةِ قَلْبِهِ وَجَوَارِهِ. Istiqamat al-qalbi bi-shay'ayn. Certainly this istiqamah is achieved, this uprightness is achieved by way of the uprightness of one's hearts and their limbs. By way of the uprightness of their heart and their limbs. And the uprightness, the righteousness of the heart, and the uprightness, the steadfastness, the righteousness of the limbs. وَفَاسْتِقَامَةُ الْقَلْبِ شَيْئَيْنِ. And when the heart is correct, then the body will be correct. This comes in the hadith of Umar, Bashir radiyallahu anhuma, أَلَا إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ إِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. Indeed, in the body is a piece of flesh, a morsel of flesh. When it is upon istiqamah, upon uprightness, then the entirety of the body will be upon uprightness. And when it is corrupt, the entirety of the body will be corrupt. Ala wa hiya al-qalbu. Indeed, it is the heart. If the heart is correct, the body will be correct. So if we want to know how to make the body correct, we have to know how to fix the heart. And the heart is fixed with these two things that we mentioned. And he's going to explain this in more detail. And love for Allah, that you put your love of Allah in front of your love for everything else. And ta'azim, al-awamir wal-nawahi, and to give respect and veneration to the commands and the prohibitions of Allah by rushing to obedience. By rushing to obedience. These are the two things. And mahabba, and putting your love of Allah in front of the love of everything else, and not just respecting Allah, but as Ibn Qayyim is going to explain, inna ta'zim al-awamir wal-nawahi min ta'zim al-amir al-nahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. That one's veneration of Allah, their respect of Allah, is proven by their respect for Allah's commands and His prohibitions, for divine commands and divine prohibitions. So these are two aspects of ubudiyyah. This is how a person gets their heart together. This is how a person is upon istiqamah. And this is how, as a result, their tongue speaks with words that are pleasing to Allah, and their body is driven to perform worship with their heart behind it, with their heart motivating them with the proper intentions and so on and so forth. He says here, أحدهما أن تكون محبة الله تعالى تتقدم عنده على جميع المحاب. He says the first of the two things that bring about the uprightness of the heart is that the love for Allah, the love the person has for Allah, takes precedence and is put in front of all other loves in his heart. Everything else that he loves in his heart, his love of Allah comes first and foremost. And it really drowns out everything else. His love of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, and he shines so brightly in his heart, or in her heart, that every other love is a far secondary consideration. فإذا تعارض حب الله تعالى وحب غيره سبق حب الله تعالى حب ما سواه. So when the love that they have for Allah conflicts and clashes with their love for anything else, then the love for Allah takes precedence and is put in front of, and it takes precedence over the love they have for anything else. فَرُتِّبَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ مُقْتَضَاهُ. And accordingly, what is caused by this love, meaning of obedience and proper conduct and speech and so on and so forth, comes as a result of it. Meaning that in front of the mahbubat of the nafs, and what is dear and near to your own ego, what is liked by other people, by your wife or by your children or by anybody else. Sheikh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala eloquently put it when he said about people who compromise their religion to make the time of the holidays of the kuffar special for their wife and their children. He said rahimahullah ta'ala in his book AQIDAH Sirat al-Mustaqim li Mukhalafati Ashab al-Jahim, he said, any words ma ma'anahu, the meaning of which is لا يتم إيمان العبد حتى يغيظ امرأته في الله. That a man will not complete his iman until he is ready and willing to upset his wife for the sake of Allah. Tabarak wa ta'ala. Person has to, يخاف في الله لومة لائم. The love of Allah has to be as such, they don't fear the blame of anybody. They don't fear the blame of any blamers or the censure, rebuke, or criticism of any person, because they are practicing their religion and obeying Allah Tabarak wa ta'ala, no matter who that person is, even if it is their spouse, is their parent, whoever it may be. Whoever it may be, and Ibn Qayyim is going to mention some of this here, inshallah ta'ala. He says, وَمَا أَسْهَلَ هَذَا بِالدَّعْوَى وَمَا أَصْعَبَهُ بِالْفِعْلِ. How easy is it to claim that your love for Allah is in front of your love of everything else. It takes precedence and priority before everything else. But how difficult it is to implement. How easy it is to claim this, but how difficult it is to implement. فَعِنْدَ الْإِمْتِحَانِ يُكْرَمُ الْإِنسَانُ أَوْ يُهَانُ. When a person is put to trial and test, as it relates to the veracity and the authenticity of this love that they have, then they are either honored or humiliated, according to their passing or failing their testimony. وَمَا أَكْثَرَ مَا يُقَدِّمُ الْعَبْدُ مَا يُحِبُّهُ هُوَ وَيَهْوَاهُ وَيُحِبُّهُ كَبِيرُهُ أَوْ أَمِيرُهُ أَوْ شَيْخُهُ أَوْ أَهْلُهُ عَلَى مَا يُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. How often it is that the worshipper, the servant, prioritizes what he himself loves and desires over what Allah loves and wants from him, or what his elder or his leader or his sheikh or his family loves in front of what Allah Tabarak wa ta'ala loves, in front of what is loved by Allah Tabarak wa ta'ala. فهذا لم تتقدم محبة الله تعالى في قلبه جميع المحاب. In such a case, the love for Allah in his heart has not been put in front of everything else that he loves. ولا كانت هي الحاكمة عليها المؤمرة عليها المؤمرة عليها. And in such a case, the love that he has for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not govern everything else that he loves, and is not the commanding force in his heart. In his heart, the sultan of his heart, of the iman in his heart, is ma'zur, has been deposed. وَسُنَّةُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي مَنْ هَذَا شَأْنُهُ. He says something very important and beneficial here. He says that the way of Allah, sunnatullah, the way of Allah, the universal way that Allah deals with people in this condition, and yunakira alayhi mahabba, is to make what he loves to be a cause of misery and distress for him, to make them hate. And that's a rahmah from Allah. As the scholars say, Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, Allah has refused, Allah refuses tabarak wa ta'ala an yarzuqa abdan biladha madama ana ما دام على المعاصي. And it is impossible that Allah will let a person truly find farah and surur and sa'ada and ladha. They truly are enjoying their life and living a meaningful life and have true happiness while they are disobedient to Him, tabarak wa ta'ala. And so it's a mercy. What he says here, the way of Allah for someone in this condition who puts what they love in front of what Allah loves is to cause him to be, is to cause what he loves to be a source of misery and distress for him, to be a headache for him, a source of misery for him. وَيُنَغِّصَهَا عَلَيْهِ فَلَا يَنَالُ شَيْئًا مِنْهَا إِلَّا بِنَكَدٍ وَتَنْغِيصٍ, to such a point that he cannot achieve anything of what he wants except with great hardship and misery and displeasure. جَزَاءً لَهُ عَلَى إِيثَارِهِ هَوَاهُ وَهَوَى مَنْ يُعَظِّمُهُ مِنَ الْخَلْقِ أَوْ يُحِبُّهُ عَلَى مَحَبَّةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And this is a fair recompense, a fair punishment for the person for his prioritizing his own desires and the desires of those that he holds in high regard or that he loves over the love of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. وَقَدْ قَضَى اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ قَضَاءً لَا يُرَدُّ وَلَا يُدْفَعُ. All of this means Samim al-Aqidah. It's from the core of creed that we believe about Allah and how Allah tabarak wa ta'ala controls the hearts and so on and so forth. And this next statement is even stronger, more powerful than the previous statement. He says that Allah Azza wa Jal, mighty and majestic, has decreed qada'an la yuraddu wa la yudfa, an irrevocable decree. أن من أحب شيئا سواه عذب به ولا بد, that whoever loves something other than him, in a way that is impermissible meaning, will be punished with that thing. That thing will be a source of punishment for them, be a source of torment and misery and punishment for them. وَأَنَّ مَنْ خَافَ غَيْرَهُ صُلِّتَ عَلَيْهِ, and that whoever fears something other than him, meaning in a way that leads to disobedience, in a way that is not permissible, صُلِّتَ عَلَيْهِ, will be subjugated and conquered by that person or that thing. وَمَنْ اشْتَغَلَ بِشَيْءٍ غَيْرَهُ كَانَ شُؤْمًا عَلَيْهِ, and whoever is preoccupied with something of this world, away from Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, getting close to Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, will find it to be a source of great misfortune. وَمَنْ آثَرَ غَيْرَهُ عَلَيْهِ لَمْ يُبَارَكْ لَهُ فِيهِ, and whoever prefers anything over Allah will find no blessing in that thing. وَمَنْ أَرْضَ غَيْرَهُ بِسَخَطِهِ أَسْخَطَهُ عَلَيْهِ وَلَا بُدٍّ, and whoever pleases others at the expense of displeasing Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, will inevitably earn the displeasure of that thing or of that person. So this is the first thing, that our love of Allah is put in front of our love of everything else. The second thing goes to the second matter after love, which is veneration, ta'zim, which is proven, as we will hear here. And it is proven a person's respect for Allah is proven by their respect for Allah's commands and prohibitions. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, this is on the second page of the resource if you have access to the PDF. الأمر الثاني الذي يستقيم له القلب تعظيم الأمر والنهي. The second matter through which the heart becomes upright, by which a person carries out uprightness in their worship and servitude of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, is ta'zim al-amri wa nahi, is veneration of commands and prohibitions, of divine commands and prohibitions. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has only commanded us with that which is of a pure, overwhelming benefit, has only forbidden us from things that are a pure, overwhelming harm for us. وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَصْلَحَتِنَا مِنَّا لِأَنفُسِنَا, and Allah knows better what will benefit us, and we know what will benefit us. وَأَقْدَرُ عَلَى جَلْبِهَا لَنَا مِنَّا لِأَنفُسِنَا, and Allah has far greater power and ability to make us achieve what is good for us above what we have for ourselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala And He wants the good for us above and beyond what we want for ourselves. And so the commands of a one who is Alimun, Azizun, Qadirun, Rahim, Adil, Tabarak wa Ta'ala, the one whose commands and His prohibitions are Ma bayna rahmati wal adl, between His mercy and His justice, and they come from unlimited knowledge. And what is murattab alayha, and what comes as a result of them, of jaza and al-wa'd wal-wa'id, reward or punishment and the threat and the promise of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, is the evidence of His power Tabarak wa Ta'ala. The one who is like that, when you understand that these commands come from the one who is watching you, the one who knows, the one who has power over all things, who is all wise Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, then it fills the heart with ta'zeem. It fills the heart with this veneration, this respect for what Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has commanded us with and forbidden us from. وَهُوَ نَاشِئٌ عَنْ تَعْظِيمِ الْآمِرِ النَّاهِ. And it comes as a result, it arises from venerating the one who commands and prohibits, the one who has issued the commands and who has issued the prohibitions. The evidence that a person truly respects and honors Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala and venerates and reveres Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala is their respecting the commands and the prohibitions of Allah. إن الله تعالى ذم من لا يعظمه ولا يعظم أمره ونهيه. Certainly Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has condemned those who do not venerate Him and do not venerate His commands and His prohibitions. As He said, حكاية عن نبيه نوح عليه الصلاة والسلام في سورة نوح قال الله تعالى ما لكم لا ترجون لله وقارا ما لكم لا ترجون لله وقارا قالوا في تفسيرها ما لكم لا تخافون لله تعالى عظمة. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He says, why is it that Nuh said to his people while calling them to Islam, why is it that you لا ترجون لله, do not place your hopes in Allah out of waqar, out of respect for Allah, veneration for Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala? What is the matter with you that you do not attribute to Allah due grandeur, hoping in His reward, knowing the magnificence and the greatness of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala? The scholars explain that this means, why don't you fear Allah due to His greatness? Why don't you fear Allah due to His greatness? We'll skip forward a little bit in the resource to what is, should be 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th page of the PDF if you have access to the PDF. Where Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala explains this in a different way. He explains this in a different way. And how a person's beliefs about Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and he bring about al-istiqam, bring about uprightness in their servitude and worship of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. He says, قاعدة في ذكر طريق قريب موصل إلى الاستقامة في الأحوال الأقوال والأعمال وهي شيئان. He says the following is a principle, a maxim, a principle concerning a short path that leads a person to istiqamah in their ahwal, in the spiritual states of their heart, what is happening in their heart, in their words and in their actions. And it consists of two things. It consists of two things. It's a different way to explain the same concept. And what is mentioned here is extremely beneficial, and we'll mention the two things up front, inshallah ta'ala, and read the details of them. The first way that he explains is here, the first component of istiqamah. In this second passage, from the two passages we said we would read at the beginning of the lesson, is hirasatul khawatir wa hifdhaho. This is an entire subject matter in Islam that is from the core of what is called ilm al-suluk, the science of the spiritual journey, and perhaps the best thing ever written in the history of Islam, on this subject matter of safeguarding the mind and the thoughts and your thoughts. Why? Ibn Qayyim is going to explain what a person thinks about. A fleeting thought turns into an idea turns into a desire or an intention turns into a resolve turns into an action when it is done over and over again becomes a habit when it is done by multiple people becomes culture. When things become like that, when things become awa'id and adat, when things become habit, and when things become the culture of a people, it is almost impossible for them to leave it. It is highly unlikely and improbable that they leave off those habits. And all of that could have been averted by a person safeguarding their mind, by a person safeguarding their thoughts. Hirasatul khawatir wa hifdhu al-afkar. And that a person guards their thoughts and protects their mind. And he's going to mention 10 things that help you protect your mind. Why you should be mindful of what you are thinking. And why, if you are having impure and harmful and destructive thoughts, you need to stop and change the way that you think before those thoughts become statements and actions. Because so long as they are thoughts, inshallah ta'ala, for the most part, you will not be taken to task for them and held accountable for them. This is not ala itlaqi, however. This is not unrestricted. Because from the greatest of the major sins is su'adhan billah. But generally, how a person thinks when they don't take control over their mind and their ego and so on and so forth, it is going to become statements and it's going to become actions. It's going to be actionable thoughts that a person carries out, at which point they are responsible in front of Allah Ta'ala for their thoughts. And so a person can stop that by, and he's safeguarding their thoughts. Before reading these 10 things, then we'll mention the second thing, inshallah ta'ala, which is that a person has sidq at-ta'ahub, ay al-isti'adad, the yawmi ma'adi. That a person, after getting control over their thoughts, that they take the second step, after making sure that their thoughts are how a Muslim should think, which is to have proper belief about Allah and proper understanding of one's religion and proper intention and that sort of thing. Then they do the next step, which is to genuinely, sincerely, with vigor and energy, prepare to meet Allah. That they prepare to meet Allah. Tabarak wa ta'ala. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَالْحَذَرْ كُلَ الْحَذَرْ مِنْ إِحْمَالِهَا وَالسِّرْسَالِ مَعَهَا. A person must be extremely cautious against neglecting their thoughts and getting carried away by their fleeting thoughts. And if something comes from the waswas of the shaitan, from the hawajis of the nafs, and from the whisperings of the shaitan, or from the whisperings of his nafs, the impulses of his nafs, and he starts to think about them, he must be extremely cautious against neglecting his thoughts and getting carried away by his thoughts and his imagination. فَإِنَّ أَصْلَ الْفَسَادِ كُلِّهِ مِنْ قِبَلِهَا يَجِيءُ. فَإِنَّ أَصْلَ الْفَسَادِ كُلِّهِ مِنْ قِبَلِهَا يَجِيءُ. He says, for indeed the root and the core cause of all corruption comes from the direction of a person's thoughts. لِأَنَّهَا هِيَ بَذْرُ الشَّيْطَانِ وَالنَّفْسِ فِي أَرْضِ الْقَلْبِ. Because the thoughts of a person are the seeds of both the shaitan and the inner self upon the soil of the heart. So they can corrupt the shajaratul iman, the tree of faith in his heart. The faith in his heart can be corrupted by these harmful weeds and these harmful parasites and these harmful pests and so on and so forth that are planted by his nafs and the shaitan upon the soil of his heart, that go directly against what Allah has revealed in the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One is going to have to give way. And so his thoughts, they are the seeds that are planted by his nafs that orders him with evil, his inner self that commands him with evil, and by the shaitan on the soil of his heart. He says, فَإِذَا تَمَكَنَ بَذْرُهَا تآهدها الشيطان بسقيه مرة بعد أخرى حتى تصير إرادات. He says, when these seeds take root, when they start to sprout and take root in that soil, when these thoughts start to take root in his heart and his mind, and the shaitan tends to them. The shaitan comes to the person saying that this person has accepted these harmful thoughts, and he starts to tend to these destructive plants in his heart by watering them again and again with whisperings and so on and so forth until they become iradat, until they become intentions, until he starts to intend to carry out these thoughts, to act upon what he is imagining. ثم يسقيها حتى تصير عزائم. Then he continues to water them until they become his resolve, his resolutions. ثم لا يزال بها حتى تثمر الأعمال. And then he does not stop until they bear actions, until they turn into a person's statements and their actions. ولا ريب أن دفع الخواتر أيسر من دفع الإرادات والعزائم. There's no doubt that a person pushing away and repelling fleeting thoughts, any thoughts that just pass through the mind real quickly, is easier to stop those thoughts than repelling his desires and his resolutions and his determinations. فيجد العبد نفسه عاجزا أو كالعاجز عن دفعها بعد أن صارت إرادة جازمة. The servant finds that when they have become firm intention within his heart to act upon, then he is unable or nearly unable. He feels that it is impossible to stop himself. وهو المفرط إذ لم يدفعها وهي خاطر ضعيف. And he was the one who was negligent because he didn't stop himself. He did not repel these thoughts when they were just weak, fleeting thoughts that passed through his mind. كمن تهاون بشرارة من النار ومن نار وقعت في حطب يابس. He says this is like a person who disregarded a spark of fire that fell upon dry wood. And a person, they see sparks of fire falling upon dry wood and they say it's not a big deal. I don't see any fire yet. So he sees sparks falling upon dry wood. This is how these thoughts are in his mind. If he disregards them, then there is going to be a bonfire soon. It's going to be a bonfire soon. فَلَمَّا تَمَكَّنَتْ مِنْهُ عَجَزَ عَنْ إِطْفَائِهَا. And when the fire overtakes the wood, a person finds he is unable to extinguish it. And in the same way, once these ideas and once these thoughts become a fire in his heart, he finds that it is very impossible, or that he feels that he is unable to extinguish it, to stop the fire. فإن قلت, so if you ask, فما الطريق إلى حفظ الخواطر؟ قلت أسباب عدة. He says, so if you ask, what is the path to preserving one's thoughts? And I will say there are several means. And many of these things go right back to the main topic, which is the athar of عقيدة صحيحة الإيمان بالله والغيبيات على القلب والأخلاق. And the effects of a person's belief about Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala upon his heart. So how does a person safeguard their thoughts? He said, then I would say in response to that, that there are several asbabun iddah. There are several means to safeguard your thoughts. أحدها, the first, العلم الجازم باطلاع الرب تبارك وتعالى ونظره إلى قلبك وعلمه بتفسير خواترك, is that you have decisive knowledge, unmistakable, certain knowledge that Allah is watching, that Allah sees you, that Allah is watching, and that Allah is looking upon your heart. This comes in the well-known hadith, and Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala la yanzuru ila suwarikum amwalikum. Allah Akbar. I made my week. Alhamdulillah, the children unanimously finish the hadith. Indeed, Allah is not looking at your appearances or your money and your property. He looks at your hearts and He looks at your amal. He looks at your deeds. He looks at your deeds. So a person knows that Allah looks at his heart. That Allah tabarak wa ta'ala la yakhfa alayhi shay'un fil ardi wala fis sama. There's nothing hidden to Allah in the heavens nor in the earth. And He knows, that Allah ya'lamu ma fi anfusikum fahdharuhu. Allah knows what is happening in your nafs, in yourself, in your inner self. So be careful and cautious about Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. So a person knows that Allah is watching, that Allah is looking upon your heart, and He knows the details of your thoughts. Athani haya'uka min. The second of the 10 things that help you get your thoughts under control is your modesty and your shyness of Allah. To be shy of Allah. To be shy that Allah sees anything in this bait, in this house, which is your heart, that Allah has created لِمَعْرِفَتِهِ وَمَحَبَّتِهِ, for you to know Him and love Him. Anything لَا يَلِيقُ أَن يُسَاكِنْ هذه المعرفة وهذه المحبة. As Ibn al-Qayyim mentions elsewhere, that a person should be shy to let anything cohabitate in his heart that Allah has created, this heart that Allah has created to know Him and love Him. Anything that goes against that knowledge of who Allah is and the love that they have for Allah, you should be shy of Allah. You should be shy of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. الثالث, the third, إجلالك له أن يرى مثل تلك الخواتر في بيته الذي خلقه لمعرفته ومحبته. He mentions almost what I just mentioned. Verbatim here. The third thing is your reverence for Allah, your ijlal of Allah, which is the same as ta'zeem. Ijlal, ta'zeem, all these things are the same meaning. And your ijlal of Allah, your reverence for Allah, and your recognition of the grandeur and greatness and magnificence of Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, that He would see such thoughts in His house, meaning your heart, that He created so that it may know Allah and love Allah. A person should have more respect for Allah tabarak wa ta'ala than allowing those things to settle in his heart. الرابع خوفك منه أن تسقط من عينه بتلك الخواتر. Your fear of Him, that you might fall from His favor due to having these thoughts. Person says that these thoughts that I have, perhaps they may cause my daraja to decrease, my standing with Allah, my level with Allah to fall. الخامس, the fifth, إيثارك له أن يساكن قلبك غير محبته. And he is that your preference for Allah, so that nothing other than His love should inhabit your heart, which is what we took in the first passage. That you put your love of Allah in front of the love of everything else. That you give إيثارك له, that you give preference for Allah, so that nothing other than His love should inhabit your heart, that nothing other than that should cohabitate in your heart alongside your love for Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. السادس, the sixth, خشيتك أن تتولد تلك الخواتر ويستعر شرارها فتأكل ما في القلب من الإيمان ومحبة الله وتذهب به جملة وأنت لا تشعر. أعوذ بالله من الخذلان. He said the sixth, your fear that these thoughts might breed other thoughts, and that the sparks of these thoughts intensify, causing a fire in your heart that consumes what exists in your heart of iman, belief and faith and mahabba and love for Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, وَتَذْهَبَ بِهِ جُمْلَةً, taking it all away from you, وَأَنْتَ لَا تَشْعُرُ, without you even realizing. Without you even realizing. Person is afraid. So stated by many of the scholars in the past. Was stated by Abu Yusuf al-Khawlani, the Salaf, كانوا يخافون النفاق على أنفسهم, used to fear nifaq for themselves. They used to fear nifaq for themselves. It was stated by Abu Idris al-Khawlani, he said, ما على ظهرها من أحد لا يخاف على إيمانه أن يذهب إلا ذهب. There is no person on the face of the earth who doesn't fear losing his iman except that he will lose his iman. And if you're not afraid of losing the most valuable thing that you have, your purpose for existence, which is to believe in Allah and to worship Allah, your cause of actual joy and happiness in life, if you're not afraid of losing it and you don't safeguard and protect it, then you should be afraid. تذهب به جملة وأنت لا تشعر, as Ibn Qayyim says here. And a person should be afraid that this type of mentality and these types of harmful, destructive thoughts may take all of his iman and his love of Allah away without even realizing it. السابع, the 7th of the 10 things, أن تعلم أن تلك الخواتر بمنزلة الحب الذي يلقى للطائر ليصاد به. بمنزلة الحب الذي يلقى للطائر ليصاد به. He said, knowing and understanding that such thoughts are like bait that is cast to catch a bird. Person, they have a piece of, or they have a pellet, a seed to catch a mouse or to catch a bird or something of the sort in order to attract the animal that you are trying to catch. You have to have a seed or a pellet or something of the sort to capture what you are hunting. And these thoughts are like that. They are like that pellet. They are like that seed that is used to capture a bird or used to capture an animal. They are like the bait. This is the bait. This is the bait that the shaitan uses to capture. He says, فَعَلَمْ أَنَّ كُلَّ خَاطِرٍ مِنْهَا فَهُوَ حَبَّةٌ فِي فَخٍ مَنْصُوبٍ لِصَيْدِهَا وَأَنْتَ لَا تَشْعُرُ. You must be aware that every thought of this kind, every harmful, destructive thought of this kind is like a pellet in a trap that is set to catch you. Yet you are unaware of it. You don't realize that at the onset. When this thought comes to your mind, you don't realize the purpose of why this has come to your mind, that your own self is your enemy. The shaitan is your enemy. And if yourself is left without adab, without ta'deeb, if yourself is left without mujahada, without waging war against it and fighting against it and taming it and training it, and so on and so forth, then it will destroy you, and the shaitan will be given authority over your heart in accordance to how much you are left unchecked and your thoughts are left unchecked. الثامن, the 8th, أن تعلم أن تلك الخواتر الرديئة لا تجتمع هي وخواتر الإيمان والدواعي المحبة والإنابة أصل. That you know that these bad thoughts cannot coexist whatsoever at the same time with thoughts of faith, dawa'i al-mahabba, and the reasons that you love Allah, and your inaba, you're turning to Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. A person cannot think about both of these things at the same time. One is going to have to give way. If a person, and he fights the mental battle or fights the spiritual battle within, when these types of thoughts come to mind, by remembering their religion, by remembering Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, thinking of the greatness of Allah, making isti'adha, all the sorts of things that a person does, there may be a short conflict, and either one is going to go or the other. Either one is going to go or the other one is going to dominate and result in action, or the other is going to result in action. And it's not just a one-time thing, obviously, that a person loses and that's the end of everything for them. But rather in a single hour, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, and he explains in various writings that a person fi sa'atin wahida, in a single hour, in a short span of time, wins some and loses some. The iman in their heart against their nafs, and the angel against and the malak against the shaitan, and this war that happens within the heart of a person, ala maydan al-qalb, on the battlefield of the heart, and it alternates in fortunes. You win some and you lose some. You win some and you lose some. However, they cannot coexist at the same time. They cannot coexist at the same time. بل هي ضدها من كل وجه. Rather, these harmful thoughts, they are the opposites of the thoughts of Iman in every way, from every aspect. وَمَا اجْتَمَعَا فِي قَلْبٍ إِلَّا وَغَلَبَ أَحَدُهُمَا صَاحِبَهُ وَأَخْرَجَهُ. And they cannot exist in the same heart without one of these types of thoughts overpowering the other, وَأَخْرَجَ, and driving the other type of thought out, وَاسْتَوْتَنَ مَكَانَهُ, and taking its place. فما ظن بقلب غلبت خواتر النفس والشيطان فيه خواتر الإيمان والمحبة والمعرفة فأخرجتها واستوطن مكانها. What would you think to be the condition of a heart where the thoughts that come from the self and the shaitan ultimately overpower the thoughts that are connected to a person's iman, their belief and their faith, and their mahabba, their love of Allah, and their ma'rifah, their knowledge about Allah and His religion, and drive their correct thoughts out and their beliefs out and so on and so forth, and take their place. لكن لو كان للقلب حياة لشعر بألم ذلك وأحس بمصيبته. And the answer to this question is, what do you think of a heart that is like that? How do you think that heart feels? And the answer is quite simply, الهم والغم والحزن. الهم والغم والحزن. الهموم الأحزان. And these are, Ibn Qayyim in his book Al-Fawaid, he said these are the arsh of shaitan ala qalb al-abd. Al-ham wal-gham wal-huzn. They are the seat of authority of the shaitan over the heart of the servant. When he controls the heart of the servant and takes it over with destructive thoughts, destructive beliefs, and so on and so forth, then the heart is dominated by sadness and worry and sorrow and anxiety, and so on and so forth. And it's no wonder that people today, despite having more creature comforts and wealth, so on and so forth, than people ever had in the past, are more depressed and miserable and sad than any people have ever been in the history of mankind, and Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala knows best. التاسع, the ninth, أن يعلم أن تلك الخواتر بحر من بحور الخيال لا ساحل له، فإذا دخل القلب في غمرته غرق فيه وتاه في ظلماته فيطلب الخلاص منه. Ninthly, that you know that such harmful thoughts, they are like an ocean of fantasy without any shore. They are an ocean of fantasy without any shore. And they are a shoreless ocean, and of pure imagination, speculation, and fantasy that have no basis in reality. They have no basis in reality. They have no good for you and no basis in reality. He said, if the heart enters into the depths of these thoughts, then it will drown and it will get lost in its darkness, seeking salvation and finding no way. That's how today's world is. Pick your poison. And all the means of destruction that people have, and in the entertainment industry, binge watching movies and shows and so on and so forth. People living in a world of fantasy, people living vicariously through imaginary, fictional characters, so on and so forth. Muslim youth, unfortunately, spending hours on end gaming, playing video games, so on and so forth. There's no sabah, and they are in a state where they are not attending to anything that will benefit them financially, that will help them provide for a family, help them be an adult in the future. They are not working for anything that will bring them close to Allah, prepare them for the hereafter. And people today, they find themselves more than any other time before, and with the advent of technology and these various industries connected to the fantasies of people. And in this description that Ibn Qayyim mentions here, more than any other time, in an ocean of fantasy that has no shore, if the heart enters into the depths of this, it drowns and it gets lost in its darkness. And it will seek salvation and will find no way out. A heart that is dominated by such thoughts is far from success. It will find itself mu'adhab. It will find itself tormented. Mu'adhab mashghulun bima la yufid. Will find itself in a tormented condition and preoccupied with what is of no benefit. Al-ashir wal-akhir, the 10th and the last means of حفظ الخواتر, which is from the asbab istiqamat al-qalb, and from the means to bring about istiqamah in the worship of the heart, and the uprightness and steadfastness in one's spiritual journey. أن تلك الخواتر هي وادي الحمقاء وأماني الجاهلين فلا تثمر لصاحبها إلا الندامة والخزي. Know that such thoughts are the valley of fools and the wishful thinking of the ignorant. It's pure imagination, and he has no basis in reality. And that a person being consumed with such thoughts and letting such thoughts govern their behavior, so on and so forth, it is the valley of hamqa, of idiots and fools. And it is the wishful thinking of the ignorant that has no basis in reality. It produces nothing but regret and disgrace for the person who harbors such thoughts without fighting them. فإذا غلبت على القلب أورثته الوساوس وعزلته عن سلطانه وأفسدت عليه رعيته أي جوارحه رعيته وألقته في الأسر الطويل. When these thoughts overpower the heart, then they give rise to the whisperings of the shaitan. They remove the sultan, the authority of the heart, so the heart cannot do what it was created for, which is to have good understanding and good intentions, and to love what is beneficial for it in this world and the next, and to hate what is harmful in this world and the next. And he loses his authority. It corrupts its subjects, meaning that, when the heart loses its authority, its subjects become corrupt. The subjects of the heart are the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the limbs, the body of the person. And he no longer work when the heart is dead or the heart is sick. These subjects become corrupt, and the thoughts of the person, al-qatu fil asr al-tawil, throw the heart into long-lasting captivity. And then Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, skipping forward just a short time, a couple pages after this, he says, Athani, once a person gets their thoughts together, and the second matter is sidq at-ta'ahub li liqa'i Allahi azza wa jal, is that a person genuinely prepares, that they ready themselves to meet Allah azza wa jal. وهذا من أنفع ما للعبد وأبلغه في حصول استقامته. And this is among the most beneficial and exhaustive means for a servant to attain uprightness, and their belief in Allah and their belief in the meeting with Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, so they prepare to meet Allah and walk upon and take that sayr in Allah wa dar al-akhir, that journey upon the path, the straight path of Islam that leads to Allah and the hereafter. They genuinely prepare to meet Allah تبارك وتعالى. فإن من استعد للقاء الله انقطع قلبه عن الدنيا ومطالبها. Because a person who genuinely prepares for meeting Allah will find his heart disconnected and detached from the world and the pursuits of this world. وخمدت من نفسه نيران الشهوات, and will have the fires of his passions extinguished. وأخبت قلبه إلى ربه تبارك وتعالى, and his heart will be humble before his Lord تبارك وتعالى. وأكفت همته على الله وعلى محبته وإيثار مرضاته, and his aspirations and his ambitions will focus upon Allah and his love of Allah and preferring the good pleasure of Allah above everything else. واستحدث همة أخرى وعلما أخرى, which constantly develops within him a new resolve and new knowledge within him. وولد ولادة أخرى, and he is then born again. He undergoes a new birth. نسبة قلبه فيها إلى الدار الآخرة كنسبة جسمه إلى هذه الدار بعد أن كان في بطن أمه. So when he puts his mind right, and he genuinely starts to prepare to meet Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, which is the result of his iman and his belief, then he is born again. And he is born again. And this is our response to the Nasara. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he quotes here in the next paragraph, as is attributed to Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam, that he said, إِنَّكُمْ لَن تَلِجُوا مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاءِ حَتَّى تُولَدُوا مَرَّتَيْنِ. That you will, O children of Israel, O children of Israel, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven until you are born again. This is being born again. Being born again is that you get your mind right. That your mind is no longer the captive of your nafs or the shaitan or anybody. That your mind has proper beliefs and that you genuinely prepare to meet Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. You become a person of good understanding and a person of himmatun aliyah, of high lofty ambition, pursuing the reward of Allah in the hereafter and to be protected from the punishment of Allah in the hereafter, pursuing the good of this world and pursuing any protection from harm in this world by following the religion of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala has guidance for all of our affairs. He says when the person is born again, the orientation of his heart is towards the hereafter, just as his body is oriented towards this world after he was in the womb of his mother. He becomes reoriented when he is born again. Now he has a proper mindset, and this proper mindset and tasawwur, this proper conceptualization of how reality is, this proper mindset by protecting his thought brings about any ta'ahub and isti'adad, any himmatun aliyah, high ambition in preparing for the hereafter. High ambition for preparing for the hereafter, and it is like he is born again, and that waking up, as Ibn Qayyim elsewhere in his writings, he calls it al-yaqadah. Al-yaqadah, waking up, wakes up. It's like he can see for the first time. It's like he can see for the first time, and when he gets this epiphany and he gets this wake-up call, he wakes up to the reality of the affair, then his body becomes oriented towards the hereafter in the way that his body became oriented towards this world when he came from the womb of his mother. And his heart experiences a real birth. فَيُولَدُ قَلْبُهُ وِلَادَةً حَقِيقِيَّةً. And his heart experiences a real birth. كَمَا وُلِدَ جِسْمُهُ حَقِيقَةً. Just as his body did when he came from the womb of his mother. وَكَمَا كَانَ بَطْنُ أُمِّهِ حِجَابًا لِجِسْمِهِ عَنْ هَذِهِ الدَّارِ هكذا نفسه وهواه حجاب لقلبه عن الدار الآخرة. We'll close on this point. And just as the womb of his mother, when he was a fetus, was a veil that separated his body from this world, then likewise his nafs, his self, and his desires are a hijab, they are a veil that separates his heart from the hereafter. They need to be pulled away. You have to step away from your desires and step away from your nafs, and you have to wake up. And all of this is من ثمرات الإيمان والعقيدة الصحيحة على القلب والأخلاق. We ask Allah تبارك وتعالى to make us of those يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسن إنه سميع قريب مجيب وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.